Infirmary Media.
Hey dudes and dudettes, thanks for tuning into this episode of the Be Kind and Rewind podcast, a podcast chock full of topics about the 80s, 90s, and more with retro celebrity interviews and fact-filled movie commentaries. I'm your host, Carlos, and this episode, base up you blockheads, because it's Knuckle Puck time as we're taking a look back into the rise and fall of kid sports movies that we enjoyed growing up, along with our own tournament of kid sports movies to determine which movie stands a test of time to earn its own cinematic universe. So joining me are two rad dudes who host their own podcast celebrating the Tude era of the 90s. So I welcome hosts of the Saved by the 90s podcast, Ken and Adam.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you for having us.
A pleasure. Yeah, you guys have a pretty stellar podcast going. I just recently started getting into. So just kind of maybe give us some insight on what made you guys want to start your podcast dedicated to the Tude era.
Sure. So we have a site called Film Pulse, and we do another podcast, just a regular weekly podcast. And Ken sometimes comes on the show. We do special like Halloween episodes and Christmas episodes and stuff. And he was on the show one time and we started talking about other things. And I had just mentioned that I wanted to maybe do a 90s show because I was kind of throwing out ideas for other podcasts. And I really love the 90s, and not just movies, but like all aspects of the 90s. And Ken immediately like jumped on it and he's like, yes, let's do something like that. And that's sort of how we got started. So we do a monthly show and we tend to dive into a specific theme around that month. So for instance, last month in June, we did bombs, like summer bombs, big summer blockbuster movies that did not do so hot at the box office. So we try to come up with different themes that sort of encapsulate the decade.
No, I've seen some of the episodes and listening to some of them. And yeah, I like the variety that you guys are going into because it is easy to kind of get pigeonholed in one little area of nostalgia, but to kind of have the variety, like you're saying, you go into the bombs. It's just nice to kind of find like that little niche into each aspect of it as opposed to kind of being really broad, because that's really where you get people's attention, honestly.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the reasons that I was so interested in doing the podcast in the first place was that opportunity to kind of take a deep dive into a broad era of pop culture and then go in and see different trends or ideas or themes that go in and out, because it's not really nostalgia for me because I'm quite young and so I really don't have any cultural memory of this entire era. So kind of the unspoken interplay on the podcast is that Adam is going back and looking at this stuff for an additional time. And I'm seeing a lot of these bigger trends and looking at them for the first time. And so we're kind of able to compare our different perspectives and reactions from there.
Yeah, it's fun, with Google, get all the information at our tips of our fingers in regards to like finding out like box office information or people's salaries or maybe some behind the scenes stuff that we, growing up had no idea what was happening, and it could have altered the way a movie would have been produced. And now we get to talk about it. We get to dive deep about it and people get to listen and enjoy it. So yeah, for me, it's been a fun ride, just kind of trying to find those categories or those like you said, themes or episodes of like, what can we talk about? How can I take a deeper look into this?
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so you guys are on a monthly basis. So you just how long ago did you release your last episode?
So we're formulating the July episode right now. So hopefully the July episode will be out soon. We're still formulating that one.
Still in the brainstorming phases. Normally mine's that phase until about 2 days until I record.
Same here. Usually same here.
Mm-hmm. I mean, we were lucky to get this one in advance, so like that was like an anomaly, but mostly, yes, it's about a 2 day in advance. I'm ready to go, maybe even sooner than that. But you know what? That's kind of how I like to operate. I guess I justify.
Yeah, we do the same thing. We sort of put on these like artificial deadlines, and we're like, okay, let's do this, and let's let's cram in 4 movies and let's cram in like 2 different TV shows and let's try to watch like 6 episodes on the show. And then we have to research because we do commercial breaks in our show, and we'll go back and we'll actually find commercials that aired during that specific month on that specific year. So there's a lot of research that goes involved in each episode too. So I like to work on a time crunch, so it's kind of fun.
And just being able to take a not terribly generalized theme and looking at it from not only movies but TV shows, and even to some extent the commercials that are even chosen in between segments. We want to emphasize that, there's lots and lots of movie podcasts out there, but our angle is that we're looking at even more than movies. We're looking at pop culture in general, and so it seemed like being able to appear on this podcast as well would be a natural fit.
Exactly. That's when I saw the podcast. I gotta have you guys on, talk about it, get your perspective on some of these subjects that have been talked about multiple times. But it's good to get other people's perspectives, and especially since you're trying to come at different angles with the nostalgia in the '90s. It just, like you said, goes hand in hand. So yeah, well then, like, you guys are working on the next episode. You'll get that out here pretty soon. We'll get the podcast plugged a little bit later, but I just want to give everybody a little brief idea into what you guys are getting into. But now we're going to get into the rise and fall of 90s kids sports movies, because growing up, we all enjoyed what we now look back as the heyday of kids sports movies, which is the golden years of 1991 to 1995. So no matter the sport, there was a movie with a bunch of personalities that any kid can relate to, inspiring basically like this whole generation of kids to give sports a try that they probably weren't going to try before, based out of fear, or maybe not thinking they're going to be good enough, that type of thing. So for my first question is, did you guys have a sport that you maybe could not get a handle on whatsoever, or one that you tried but you surprisingly picked up immediately? I guess just to answer quickly, for me, mine was in track and field. It was the high jump. I had no idea up until like middle school that was something I was going to do. I grew up thinking, oh, I'm going to play in the NBA, or I'm going to catch touchdowns in the NFL. But come like middle school, 8th grade, I was the only one who could touch the rim at like 5'6". So I was like, okay, maybe I can translate this into something. And then come track and field, they showed that video they show in the cafeterias, like, here's what this event is, here's what that event is. And then high jump came. I'm like, I might be pretty okay at that, given I can touch the rim. And then turns out that, yeah, I was like jump over a flat bar, or a bar onto a mat pretty easily. So I was winning first place at these track meets, and I was like 5'6", jumping over 6 feet, and then getting into high school and jumping over like 6'8" and stuff like that. This is something I never thought I would actually be doing, but it was pretty unexpected for me at that point. So what about you guys?
So this actually kind of goes along with some of what we're going to be talking about today. After I saw the movie The Mighty Ducks, I never saw myself as being a hockey player. I never had an interest in hockey. I was really into baseball growing up, but hockey was never something that really spoke to me. And after I saw The Mighty Ducks, I became absolutely obsessed with hockey, and I started playing hockey, and I really took a shine to it for like a year. And then, of course, as a little kid, like, you just get out of it and move on to something else. But for that short amount of time, like, I was just absolutely obsessed with hockey.
Well, that's what those movies did. They, like, as soon as you walk out of the movie theater, you wanted to go grab a hockey stick, and you wanted to go get into a game right then and there. You wanted to go get your rollerblades or your skates on. It was just so inspiring. So yeah, I too walked out of many of sports movies thinking, oh, this is what I'm going to do from now on.
Yeah, on mine. And I don't have any particularly great sports stories. I did run track very briefly in elementary school, and I did play Little League like many other people. I wasn't very good at either, and I didn't really enjoy either. So that was for a few years then. I kind of drifted away from sports, and I did my fair share of like extracurriculars in high school, but they were decidedly not sports related. So I don't have any great anecdotes or connections to make on this question.
To be clear, I was awful at every single sport I ever played. Like I liked hockey, I liked baseball, but I was so bad at all of them. And no matter how much I practiced, I never got any better, which is like the funny thing about watching all of these movies where you have these like underdogs and they're all persevering and they all start off with these like loser, scrappy kids, and then they end up winning the big game or whatever. And it's like, it was like the exact opposite as for me. I was like, I started off as the unathletic loser, and that's how I ended the season.
just there were no evolution, just the same spot. Yeah, no, I was kind of the same way, especially like with hockey and those I guess non common sports, especially in the Midwest. So like, it's a new to us. So I thought, I could pick up hockey, no problem. No, that was not the case. I was terrible at it. And so, yeah, I could pick up some other sports fairly decently, but hockey and this new sports, I just could not get a handle on. So yeah, it was tough, but like I said, not everyone has their sports connections, and sometimes they're just different from others. But like I was saying, from 1991 to 1995, they made over 10 kids sports movies during that 4-year period. We had football, basketball, hockey, especially baseball, because baseball was huge during the early 90s. So we had, of course, the Mighty Ducks, Sandlot, Rookie of the Year, D2, Space Jam, Little Big League, Angels in the Outfield, Little Giants in the Big Green. Basically, if you were going over to a sleepover, those are the list of movies you were essentially picking from, that you're going to watch a VHS tape and have some pizza with your friends. Yeah, but they're mostly popular because, they were team sports, because they didn't do many golf or tennis or individual sports. They wanted to bring that team aspect. They wanted kids they wanted to bring an ensemble of characters together so that, there's always somebody to relate to. But they also wanted their own versions of the Bad News Bears.
Absolutely. I mean, so many of these played with the exact same formula pretty much over and over. Now, there's obviously some outliers, like Little Big League is a little bit of an outlier, but that still falls into the formula of like a little kid doing a grown-up job, that kind of subgenre. So these movies were just so huge back then. Yeah,
they just, they're perfectly in the mid-level, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But they didn't go too big. They kept it right. They knew what they were, and they didn't try to go too big. And none of them, I would say, are terrible. But like I said, we'll talk about that here in a sec. But would there be what other sport, I guess, do you think would be just as popular now if they made a movie about it? So like a new sport.
That's a great question.
What I put was esports. Due to the growing popularity and the competitiveness. Maybe a callback to the Wizard. Revealing a new game at the end, or bringing back the Power Glove.
I love the Power Glove. It's so bad.
I think that's a great answer. I think esports is definitely an emerging market, and we know that esports is wildly popular now. So if they made a kids sports movie that involved esports, it would do gangbusters.
I think so as well.
It's just like I said, let's get a new game. Let's get Fred Savage back. Let's rock him out, and we'll talk about the kid from Little Big League who was also in the Wizards. So we could do the double, bring him back. And I think the girl is like she's like a popular like singer. I'm not sure if it's here or internationally, but we can get them all back together, and we could do this esports somehow, some way. Like just like they're bringing back all old cast members from every other movie. Let's do it with the Wizard.
Sounds like a plan.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, talking about these movies that we bring back, with the esports and the Bad News Bears versions that we had, those were the things that would be the rise and basically the top from 1991, 95. That was the cream of the crop, but things just started to go downhill at some point. The box office, honestly, for a lot of these movies weren't really that great. They had that mid-level budget, but they were also making mid-level profits. They make the budget back, but just a little bit extra, not enough to really, justify a sequel, with the exception of Mighty Ducks. But for the most of them, they weren't making, gangbusters at at the box office is mainly VHS and the sales at that point.
Well, you did just touch on what I was going to say, is that a lot of these feel like quintessential like rental movies.
Oh yeah, and that's one of my questions I was going to ask you guys. If you can remember, did you watch a lot of these movies in theaters, or were these mostly home video for you?
I remember almost every single one of these. So I saw the bulk of them I did see in theaters. I remember I saw Angels in the Outfield like 2 or 3 times in the theater. Rookie of the Year was a pay-per-view movie for me. I got that on pay-per-view, I believe. We actually talked about Rookie of the Year on our show. I think it was the very first episode we talked about.
I think it might have
Rookie
been
of
the
Year.
first movie we discussed on the first episode.
Yeah.
God and Hosa.
And Mighty Ducks, I saw that in the theater. A couple of these that we're going to be talking about, I actually never saw before doing this. So those were the interesting ones for me.
Yeah. On my end, as I said, I'm quite young. So
too young.
Yeah, I did not see all these movies came out before I was born, actually. But I had seen quite a few of them just growing up, because a few of them, like The Sandlot or The Mighty Ducks, just had this, or Space Jam just had this like quickly held cultural ubiquity that they were still very much there even for kids growing up sometime later, which is kind of unusual, because I feel like a lot of kids pop culture is either multi-generation enduring or brand new, and there's not too much of it that's 10 or 15 years old at the time that someone's seeing it. So just knowing that some of these were immediately catching on and holding on immediately kind of speaks to their sticking power.
Yeah, you're right, because a lot of these movies, even though they came out a few years beforehand, they were like utilizing for like re-releases. We're gonna put it back in the movie theaters, or they'd be like summer movies for kids to, like, younger kids to watch. They'd bring back movies that came out like maybe about a decade earlier, about 5 to 10 years earlier. And like you said, like Space Jam and Mighty Ducks, those movies sometimes would fall into that category. But for me, it would be 50-50, because as a kid, summer was when we spent most of the time at the movie theater, until like middle school, high school, that type of thing. But many of the movies, they had like fall and spring releases. They were kind of all over the place before they kind of got a handle on when kids were really watching movies. And so for me, just for, I guess for, just being able to go to the movies, it was only in the summertime. So I saw a lot of these movies on VHS. It was a lot of the rentals that at that time we would have to wait 9 to 12 months before we'd see it on VHS.
I was gonna mention that, actually. Like, a lot of these movies, like Mighty Ducks came out in 92, but when it came out on VHS, it was probably not till at least a year later.
Yeah, and of course, our interest gets distracted to something else, or a new movie that's coming out. So for these franchises, or for these movies, it had to have been tough, because Mighty Ducks would come out, but then it'd be in the theater for a few months, and then there'd be that gap of like 6 to 12 months where there's nothing. We just, for only the ones who were still interested, waiting around, like me, going down to the local grocery store that had a movie section and asking them every Friday, hey, is this movie out yet? Hey, is this movie out yet? And they literally would have to show me the schedule to shut me up, so I know when these movies were coming out. I'd see the schedule. I'm like, okay, it takes a long time.
Yeah, because you can't really, back then you couldn't really check the internet for release dates. And when these were coming out, I was like 9 to 12 years old. So I had really no concept of how movie releases worked. Like, things I would see an ad for something, and I wouldn't know if it was in the theater or if it was out on video or what the situation was with that movie. All I would know is like, I have to see this.
I remember a friend of mine, because I learned early on, thanks to these people at the grocery store video section, shout out to Dylan's, and I learned early on. So I had a friend stay over one time, and we walked down to the store with me, and he was asking the clerk, is Mrs. Doubtfire out yet? And I remember it was still in movie. It was basically had maybe just left the theaters or like on the tail end of it. And I remember we were like 7 years old. I looked at it, I was like, no, man, it's not coming out till like at least August because it's just leaving theaters. And he could not understand a word that I was saying. He's like, wait, it's not out. I can't get it now. I'm like, yeah, it just left the theaters, man. So I learned pretty young. I think it was Tuesdays because CDs and movies, they came out on Tuesdays. That was the big day.
Mm-hmm.
So those are, of course, like you said, as a young kid, knowing those schedules was the first official nerding out.
Absolutely.
But other things, too, that kind of led to the demise was the talent level for these movies. You know, we love these actors because, you know, they're recognizable to us now or after all these years of seeing them in this one movie so many times. But we have to think back at the time, they weren't A-listers. You know, they were still up and coming, or this was like their first or second real big movie at the time. So after the movies maybe gained their cult status or the VHS and rental sales began to skyrocket, that's when studios, you know, they wanted to take the money and run. They weren't looking to sink the minimal profits into a higher child actor's salary or higher money for a sequel, which was normally the case. So it's just kind of one of those. It was kind of a cycle that, you know, I wish didn't happen.
I think one of the things was like, as we talked about previously, there's a very specific formula to these movies. When you watch a whole bunch of these back to back to back, you see the patterns emerge very quickly. And I think that for a lot of these studios, it was probably just easier for them to pivot and come up with the same story, but a different sport and a different ensemble of characters than return to the same cast and try to churn out a sequel. Just to encompass like the most broad audience as possible. Like, oh, these kids don't like baseball. Let's make a soccer version instead.
Exactly. And that's what they would do. That was what their pivoting is because, you know, sports is very regional. Baseball, basketball, soccer, like basketball is starting to become more global now, but, you know, 25, 30 years ago wasn't the case. And so, you know, the movies weren't transitioning or translating, you know, to other countries as well as, you know, they wanted. And of course, nowadays we need the 4-quadrant movies for basically everything because everything is a home run type of philosophy when it comes to big budgets and marketing and things like that. There's no mid-level. Right. You know, it's either super independent or super high budget. There's no real in-between. And so these sports movies would fall in that in-between category, and there's just really no category anymore for them to fall in. And the sports movies, the sport itself would have to be global, like a soccer or, you know, I guess even now basketball being more global. But one of my questions was going to ask, of the movies that we did have that we talked about that don't have sequels, do you have one that you would want if it's had a sequel for?
Ooh, I don't know, Ken. Why don't you tackle this one first?
We'll talk about it more when it happens, but I feel like one of the movies that we are looking at least the ones that I was able to actually watch or rewatch in time for this podcast. So just general disclaimer to all the listeners, when we get to the tournament, I might recede a bit from the conversation, but the one that I felt like had the most outwardly bizarre premise of the ones that I have seen is Little Big League. So, but then after it was over, I just wanted like an entire franchise of kids in various like managerial positions in just all of the different sports.
Yeah, I could go for a Little Big League. I could go for a Little Big League sequel just because A, we don't get kids sports movies anymore, and B, we don't get kids doing grown-up things anymore, movies anymore either. So I think that would tackle both of those subgenres really well. So I would love to see like a Little Big League sequel involving literally any other sport. I would prefer like a really obscure sport like curling or something. But any other sport would work.
Yeah, I'm on board with that as well. And like you said, since, you know, these movies are fairly new to you, that's the best part, you know, of having our perspectives of seeing them, you know, in their originality, but you now have seen them recently. So now we get this, you know, our dichotomy of opinion. So don't take it as a slight.
Oh, no. No.
You know, that's just because you just now seen them. You now have this new perspective that we're so jealous of because we'd like to go back and see it for the first time on most occasions. On some of these, not all of them, but on some.
Yeah,
of them.
I think that, like I said, I think that is part of like the unspoken interplay on Saved by the 90s is that most of the time it's something that Adam has seen possibly many times before, but maybe something I've never seen before, maybe only once a long time ago.
Yeah, that's one of the most fun things is hearing his opinion on it, seeing it in 2019 versus my recollection of seeing it back then and how it was received back then and what the general because the pop culture zeitgeist is much different then compared to now. And you see that in a lot of these movies, even the ones that we watched for this show, there's like some jokes and things that they say where you're just like, oof, that would not fly in a 2019 movie. And I like hearing his reaction of these movies, watching them now for the first time.
Definitely, I bet you it's enlightening, like with him coming up with certain, like you said, some of these things that maybe don't fly nowadays. As we watch it over the years, we just take it as normal because we've seen it so many times, and that was part of the culture then, or it's a little more accepted, I guess, at that point. But nowadays, times have changed for sure. So to hear what he has to say, maybe open our eyes a little bit more about some of these cherished movies and TV shows.
Yeah, I mean, going back to the last question about one of these that I would like to see now. I would like to see, because extreme movies, like extreme sports movies, were really big back then too. And I would like to see a new extreme sports movie made today that sort of pulls in all of the ridiculous tropes from those movies and just from the 90s extreme sports culture, like in general, but have it set in the 90s. So like a modern 90s set movie that just douses itself in the ridiculous like jinkos and rollerblading and all of that tude. That's sort of what I want to see. Like
an Airborne / Rad type mashup situation.
I want to see Airborne 2, but I don't want it to. I don't want it to be like a Disney Channel original. I want it to be like a real movie that has a real budget, but just. I want them to just go hog wild with the 90s tude, because like we're starting to see a lot more of these sort of 90s like modern movies that are set in the 90s, but I don't feel like any of the ones that have come out recently really embrace the style of the 90s and just like the ridiculousness of so much of it.
Yeah, you're right. It's a lot of music referencing and a little bit of the lingo, but they haven't gone full 90s in some of these movies. So you're right. So like you said, let's get an Airborne Rad mashup. Somebody needs to die on Devil's Backbone.
And specifically, so like you have movies like mid 90s that came out last year, right? The Jonah Hill movie. And that I think really, really embraces the 90s. And I think that in a lot of ways, it very much pays a loving homage to the decade, but that's sort of like the real life version of the 90s. I want to see like the Capri Sun commercial version of the 90s, where everything is just so out of control and like kids rule, parents suck, like that style, but in a movie.
I want the Kool-Aid Man to come through the wall multiple times in a movie.
Oh yeah,
that's what we're talking about.
Go.
Yes, absolutely. I'm on board with that. Yeah, let's get a movie that leans into everything, into basically a Nickelodeon commercial break is what we're looking for.
That's exactly right. That's what I want.
So yeah, well, mine, I guess, real quick, would be Little Giants. I'd want a sequel for Little Giants just because they can do the natural kid movie evolution like they did with Mighty Ducks, where the kids are now in high school and they're competing for spots on the high school team against the Cowboys. Maybe some other new players they bring in now, since they're from, in high school, you bring in other people from other areas, that type of thing. And then maybe some of the players realize, football's for them. They love it. Some people realize it's not for them. They have that whole reality in the movie that, sports is not for everybody, or you can find different ways to contribute, that type of thing. So I think a Little Giants sequel would be good, but I don't know, the Little Big League, I kind of like the franchise you guys are going with that in regards to get little kids to do different sports manager jobs. Let's do it.
We are all ready to announce the Little Big League cinematic universe.
We've almost determined it before we even got to the tournament. So, but we're almost there. One last thing about the fall of kids sports movies. We talked about, the big marketing, the budgets, the marketing, over $100 million. The mid-level just doesn't exist anymore. So my last question I want to ask you guys is, which of these global sports would you make a $100 million budget movie with? So the first one is ping pong. Second one is curling. Third one is synchronized diving. Or the fourth one is race walking.
There have been a number of ping pong movies that are actually pretty good. They usually come out of Asia, but there've been a few of them that have been pretty good. So I might stay away from that one just because.
But are they $100 million?
No, they're not. I would assume
Michael Bay versions.
I would assume that they're not. Maybe the diving. I might go with the diving. That could conjure up some really fun drama. I could see some rivalries happening there, and it might pave the way for some interesting set pieces. So I think I'd go with the diving.
I would go with the race walking just because I would pay top dollar for John Williams' super dramatic music as the people are slowly walking by each other back and forth, and just maybe some explosions going on in the background. And I guess I got to get some A-list. You got to get Brad Pitt or something. You got to pay somebody top budget, to get to do the race walker. So I'm leaning into the race walking.
I was going to say curling because I just want to. I would just want to be like an executive that. I guess one of their last actions before apparently leaving Hollywood forever, because they're not coming back after this, would be like throwing $150 million at someone and saying, make a curling movie that costs this exact amount of money.
I wouldn't be surprised to see a curling movie, but it would be a comedy. It would be like, a dodgeball or one of those.
It would not be a tentpole movie.
Like a Blades of Glory type of situation.
Because for a while there, they were coming up with all kinds of comedic sports movies, and I would not be surprised to see curling pop up on that list.
You're right, because it's always kind of the butt of the joke when it comes to the Winter Olympics. Everyone's like, oh, look, you can get 3 dads from the parking lot and get him into curling, and they look like an actual team. Or, that's what some of the teams they compare them to. And so they are kind of always the butt of the joke. Everyone's like, well, I can do that. Give me a broom. And there's always those Facebook videos of people with their brooms and like some Roomba or whatever in front of them doing that. So, yeah, I think you're right. I think curling is ripe for an actual like comedic movie. But maybe synchronized diving, race walking, they're maybe ripe for like $100 million independent film that wins them an Oscar of some sort. Who knows? I just wonder out there for us to make a movie.
Yeah, if I had to give a serious answer, then I would definitely go for the diving, because I actually think you could do something with like that. Maybe. I did like the answer that Adam gave, and it really did make me think that we could have some set pieces centered around that specific skill set.
I think so too. So I think like you said, we'd be some great executives on our way out. So, well, that was about all I want to get into for the rise and fall of the 90s kids sports movie. Just a little buffer before we get into our tournament, it is now time for that, for our kids sports movie tournament. It's in order for us to determine which of these movies is going to stand the test of time for that cinematic universe that we've been talking about. So we have 8 kids sports movies right now from the 90s. We're going to have 3 rounds of matches to determine our winner. So we'll just give our arguments on whether or not we vote yes or no to see which movie will win each match. So I'll start off. I'll go through both movies and then my arguments, and then I'll give my final answer. So the first matchup that we have Angels in the Outfield versus Rookie of the Year. So first one, Angels in the Outfield.
Dad, when are we gonna be a family again? A boy searching for a future.
I'd say when the Angels win the pennant.
And a team that's their only prayer.
There's a thing called talent. They don't have it.
God, if there is a God, maybe you could help him win a little. I'd really, really like a family.
Ben Williams makes a miraculous catch.
Holy cow!
How do you do that?
Just call me Al. No one can see me or hear me but you.
Unbelievable!
You really do see something, don't you? Yeah! Make some kind of signal.
I'll go like that, okay?
Even though you can't see us, we're always watching.
Disney's Angels in the Outfield.
Was released July 15th, 1994. It was about Roger, who lost his mother, is living separated from his father as he and his friend JP are friends of the California Angels baseball team. He's only got two dreams: living together with a real family and seeing the Angels winning the pennant. When Roger prays for a chance to have a family if the California Angels win the pennant, Angels are assigned to make that possible. So, for whatever reason, it was this movie and like Major League. It was all about the pennant. Why, if you're going to make a whole movie about a sport, make it about the championship, the whole thing. What is with this pennant thing?
I literally thought about that while I was watching this. I was like, why are the stakes are often very low for a lot of these?
Go for the World Series. Can we not boast it? Can you not? Maybe they couldn't pay for like the name World Series or something. I don't know. So pennant was like kind of almost like it seems like a made up name, but there actually is a pennant that they go for.
Yeah, it did seem like an odd choice because even if you couldn't say World Series, you could come up with something.
Championship.
You
Yeah.
say championship.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. So
yeah.
for me as a kid, not really knowing what pennant was, I was like, I guess that's like a somewhat of a championship, but I knew the stakes were lower. But the movie itself, the cast, they had Christopher Lloyd, from Back to the Future, Addams Family, Taxi, all kinds of other stuff. Danny Glover, Lethal Weapon, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, a young Joseph Gordon-Levitt from Third Rock from the Sun, 10 Things I Hate About You, Dark Knight, Tony Danza, I think Who's the Boss had just ended a few years before, a pre-Oscar Matthew McConaughey, I think fresh off Dazed and Confused, and then Adrian Brody was hiding in that cast somewhere as well.
Yeah, I think McConaughey and Brody didn't even have any dialogue.
I'm pretty sure they didn't. I think McConaughey had one play where like an angel lifted him and he fell on the ground, had like a reaction shot, and that was it.
Yeah.
But the movie had a $31 million budget. The box office was $50 million. So not really a success, not a total flop, but not, like I said, not a success. The film has a 35% on Rotten Tomatoes with an average rating of 4.2, so not so awesome. But the movie is very entertaining, but it's not very memorable. It's not really referenced today, just because there's so many baseball movies that you think it would, if you gotta rise to the top. Mostly people are mocking the whole angel wing flap thing that they did in the movie.
Oh yeah.
And of course, using Christopher Lloyd, he was a very common actor this time, but he was kind of on the tail end of his run. He'd released 15 movies since Back to the Future ended, like 4 years before this. And he released 5 movies in 1994 alone. There's Camp Nowhere, Feliday, The Page Master, and Angels in the Outfield. So maybe a little bit of overexposure of Christopher Lloyd at that time. We'd seen a little too much of him. Tony Danza was really not that relevant. Tony, like I said, Who's the Boss had ended 2 years before that, and he hadn't been in a movie since 1989, 5 years before that. So, and also bad timing. The movie itself was released before the 1994 MLB strike. So, the people weren't really excited for baseball or baseball movies at the time. So it's just kind of bad timing. So that was my arguments for Angel in the Outfield. Now we're going to move on to Rookie of the Year.
The bone is fine, but the tendons have fused with the humerus. Is that bad? It's unusual. Let's take a look. Okay, let's start with the fingers. Good, good. Now raise the arm. Good, good. Now to the side. Good. Now bend at the elbow. Good, good. And now rotate from the shoulder slowly.
Oh! Funky butt loving.
Did he say funky butt loving?
That was released in July 1993. When an accident miraculously gives a boy an incredibly powerful pitching arm, he becomes a major league pitcher for the Chicago Cubs. This has Thomas Ian Nicholas, Henry Rodengartner from American Pie, John Candy, who's the announcer. Then we had Gary Busey, Chet Steadman, sweet name, Daniel Stern as Brickma, and then we had Eddie Bracken, owner Bob Carson. The movie had a $31 million budget, box office of $56 million, so just a little bit more than Angels in the Outfield, but I wouldn't say a success at all. The film received 35% approval on Rotten Tomatoes, but this movie is referenced a lot today. It's still very relevant in pop culture, thanks to the many quotable lines from this movie, like the pitcher's got a big butt. Did he just say funky butt loving? Let the big dog eat. Also, one of my favorite parts, of course, you heard earlier, is when the club manager kept saying his name incorrectly.
Rosenbagger, Gardenhoser, Rulengroder,
Ravenboozer.
Way to go, run amucker!
Just these running jokes they had throughout the movie. Daniel Stern was riding his post Home Alone wave from from Home Alone, City Slickers, Bushwhacked, Celtic Pride was coming out, or Celtic Pride was coming out soon.
You see, after the game, a lot of guys like to ice up their arm. Still other fellas think that heat is the way to go. But I have discovered the secret, Henry. Hot ice. That's right, hot ice. I heat up the ice cubes. It's the best of both worlds.
And so it's just it had a lot going with it, and this was Gary Busey just right after he had his a motorcycle accident, and one of John Candy's last movies as well. So a lot going for it, and like I said, I think it's still referenced a little bit more to this day. So for me, I think I'm going to lean more toward Rookie of the Year. So what about you?
I'm Rookie of the Year, 100%. So from when I was a kid, I really liked Angels in the Outfield a lot, but I also loved Rookie of the Year. I taped it off of pay-per-view, so I endlessly watched that on my tapes, and rewatching Angels in the Outfield, that just doesn't hold up. Like the angel effects are shaky at best. They look kind of rough, and I just didn't think it was as funny as Rookie of the Year. It doesn't hold up like by today's standards, and also, you realize that these angels are helping them cheat. They're cheating through the whole season except the very last game. And I don't know. I just feel like the plot seems so loose in that movie that I can't get behind it.
Yeah, I have to vote for Rookie of the Year as well. There's probably more to remember and latch onto there. And also points for being something that we reviewed on our podcast.
There you go. And he had a wicked arm.
Did you guys see the video of like a year or two ago? Some dude did the same thing from the stands. I think it was at a Red Sox game. He threw from the Green Monster all the way to like second base, and then they showed the reaction of John Candy and everybody in the stadium in the movie. Cut it together. I was like, get that guy a contract.
I'll have to look that up.
But yeah, like you said, I agree. Rookie of the Year just kind of stands above because it's more memorable, more references. Angels in the Outfield just doesn't hold up. Just like you said, helping cheating in the game. That as a kid, it kind of went over my head. But yeah, I was like, man, looking back, you think God would be a little more fair, like would somehow help him, but not completely help him cheat. So yeah, I agree. We have our first casualty. Then Angels in the Outfield is out. We're moving forward with Rookie of the Year.
Funky butt loving.
So now we're on to our next match. This one is Little Giants versus Space Jam. So Little Giants was released on October 14th, 1994.
Let me tell you people something. This ain't just a football. This is your hopes, your dreams, your ambitions, your soul in a roll. It's your life. Tomorrow on that field, it's do or die. Win or cry. Go, baby, go! Amen. Tonight when you go home, I want you to brush your little teeth. I want you to wash your little faces. And I want you to dream the sweet dreams of football glory. Because tomorrow we're going to crush the little giants into smithereens. What do you say, men?
Is about misfits form their own opposing team to an elite Pee Wee football team, the Cowboys, coached by the elite team's coach's brother. So this has Rick Moranis, Danny O'Shea, Ed O'Neill, Kevin O'Shea, and Devin Sawa as Junior, and good old Harry Shearer makes an appearance as the announcer. The movie had $20 million budget, only made $19.3 million, so didn't quite make it there. The reception, it's about 36% on Rotten Tomatoes. The movie, like we talked, just basically flopped at the box office, but thanks to the rampant VHS rentals and sales, it did become a cult classic fairly quickly at the time, basically spawning hundreds of Pee Wee leagues all over the country, because my town itself was victim of that. As soon as Little Giants came out, we had onslaughts of parents being like, we need a Pee Wee football league. I need a Pee Wee football league for my 6-year-old. And so that's kind of what got it going. It jumpstarted a lot of these leagues. Also, the famous winning play, the annexation of Puerto Rico, has been referenced by 30-somethings during every football season since, and it's been used in the NCAA and NFL multiple times. In 2011, the Carolina Panthers and the Houston Texans used the play in one of their games. So yeah, it's got a good cultural reference to this day, in my opinion, for Little Giants. Now moving on to Space Jam.
Everybody get up, it's time to slam now. We got the real jam going down. Welcome to the Space Jam. Here's your chance, do your dance at the Space Jam. Alright.
So Space Jam was released in November 96. In a desperate attempt to win a basketball match and earn their freedom, the Looney Tunes seek the aid of the retired basketball champion Michael Jeffrey Jordan. So we have Michael Jordan, Larry Bird, Bill Murray, Wayne Knight, and the Looney Tunes along with the Monstars. The budget, $80 million. Box office, $230 million. The film has a 43% on Rotten Tomatoes, and it was just a huge cultural phenomenon. It had Michael Jordan, it had the Looney Tunes. He was in the middle of his championship run. The movie spawned all kinds of different mediums like video games, comics, toys. Even that Toon Squad basketball jersey is everywhere. You see it at almost every NBA game, or just kids in general still wear it. The soundtrack was awesome. Has some solid tunes from R. Kelly covering I Believe I Can Fly, even though he was just arrested on sexual trafficking. We'll just blow past that real quick. Seal covering
I don't
Steve Miller's.
He is the way you want to sell people on this movie.
No. Even though the song is
an iconic
good,
song, there's no
R.
doubt
Kelly is not.
that.
Yeah.
But
R. Kelly is not good. The song is.
I think I can live without it.
Yes, I agree. So yes, well, like we said, R. Kelly has done some terrible things, and so we were not going to boast his other things. But Seal did a cover of Steve Miller's Fly Like an Eagle, and then we had the Monstars anthem with Be Real, Busta Rhymes, Coolio, LL Cool J, and Method Man, along with Quad Cities rocking out the film's Space Jam title theme. So it just had all kinds of cool things going for it. The website is still the same as it was back then, and of course everyone knows we're getting Space Jam 2 with LeBron James and a cast of some NBA players. I look at the
Space Jam website like a couple of times a year.
It's still got the flashing space lights and everything.
Yeah, I feel like Space Jam's kind of the outlier from all the things we're talking about, because unless The Big Green is just absolutely bonkers, this is the movie that is in many ways like the most fantastical outlier of every other movie on this list. Like it crosses over into multiple fields of like pop culture, and it crosses over in the most direct way. It's like about traveling between universes, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, like on our show, often we will have a set of movies, and there'll be like one that's definitely different than all of the rest. And I think that Space Jam is that one in this list. You can draw parallels between a lot of these movies, but Space Jam is certainly the outlier. And I think that the winner of this matchup, I think I'm going to be the one who loses with my pick.
Well, then I'll put in my decision then to kick it off. I actually am going to go with Space Jam just because, yes, like you guys said, it's an outlier. It's not next. There's kids in the movie, but it's not a kids sports movie. But it's got Looney Tunes. It's got Michael Jordan. It brings in all these different aspects like you talked about. So it is that weird outlier. But again, it just still has that cultural, relevance to this day with the sequel coming out, with the website that Ken even admitted just that he checks multiple times a month
year,
or a week, however many times. A year. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I didn't want to make you an addict real quick.
There's not neither enough still active on the Space Jam website to look at it multiple times a week.
You're just pouring over it over and over again, Ken.
Bob Dole's 1996 campaign website is also still online. There's nothing left on it to look at.
That's hilarious. Does it still have the counter, the visit counter?
It probably does. Apparently, every website from 1996 is still active.
Yes, we'll have to have an episode just on that, just to go back and visit those old ass websites. So yeah, I'm going with Space Jam. What were your guys' decision?
Go ahead, Ken.
I did not see the Little Giants in time for this podcast, so I guess I have to default to Space Jam.
So my answer is, so I hate Space Jam. I'm not one of these people that I think that there's a lot of revisionist history when it comes to Space Jam, because it was not a very well liked movie by a lot of people back when it came out, and I think that it is still a fundamentally bad movie. Now,
I think I kind of agree with you. Like, I'm not saying it's great.
Oh, definitely. I think we're all on the same page there.
So
sure.
if I'm taking my personal feelings out of this tournament, I would give it to Space Jam, just because I think that it is a more culturally relevant and popular movie than Little Giants. I didn't think Little Giants was that good either. To be honest with you, this was the first time I've ever seen Little Giants, because I remember when this came out, I was like not interested in it at all. But I do love Rick Moranis. I'm a huge Rick Moranis fan. So going back and seeing that for the first time was fun, although it's not a great movie either. So I guess I will give it to Space Jam 2, reluctantly.
It is tough to make these decisions because without the rose-tinted glasses and everything, because we're looking back at a lot of these movies, there is a lot of plot holes, bad acting, not so great stories, things like that we overlooked as kids. But now it is tough with this subjective decision based on either cultural relevance or our own personal reasons of some sort. But I think, like you said, you're right. We have to kind of look at it as, what not the better movie in regards to like those other aspects, but yeah, the cultural relevance I think is the main thing, because with all these sequels and reboots, we're looking to see which one's going to be best fit for this cinematic
universe.
You were expecting maybe the Easter Bunny?
So that's I guess that's the way we have to keep approaching these. So we're getting down there. We're on to our next match here. So we have Space Jam as our winner for that one. Our next matchup, we got Little Big League versus The Big Green. So the Little Big League was released June 29th, 1994.
We got a relatively big game today, kid.
Yeah, well, I got a relatively big math tutor. Can't have this hanging over my head.
I've always heard that it helps to write it down. Scales, get over here.
Now it comes down to this. You wonder what goes through the minds of the players and the coaches in pressure situations like these.
Using the simple formula, A times B over A plus B, we arrive at our answer of 1 7/8.
Wow, are you sure?
Oh, but of course, my diminutive leader. Long have I been familiar with the exactitudes of the mathematical world.
So when the owner of the Minnesota Twins dies suddenly, he leaves this the team to his son Billy, or to his grandson Billy, who takes over, starts managing the team. Of course, all the players are not having this whatsoever, but Billy quickly fires the existing one before he takes over, and that wins their approval. And Billy just tries to figure things out as a kid who is currently running a baseball team. The cast had Luke Edwards, who played Billy. He was from Newsies. He was, I forget his name, and he was the younger brother in The Wizard, and he's in Jeepers Creepers 2. And then we also had Timothy Busfield, who was Lou Collins. He was one of the security or the agents in First Kid. He was in Revenge of the Nerds and Field of Dreams. The budget was undisclosed, so they didn't want to know how much they spent on it, but it only made $19 million. The score of Rotten Tomatoes was 33%. For me, this was I've only seen it a few times, and I can honestly say I could say I was bored through most of the times. I honestly cannot recall too many scenes from the movie, even though I've seen it a few times. That's probably how checked out I was. But the movie also flew under the radar because it was released just a week after The Lion King, Speed, and Getting Even with Dad with Macaulay Culkin, one of his first movies post Home Alone. And then 2 weeks after that, Forrest Gump came out and Angels in the Outfield. So it had a lot of competition as well. But for me, it just didn't have very many familiar cast members to get me interested. Angels in the Outfield had Christopher Lloyd, so they had that little bit of edge to his familiarity. But for me, it just wasn't catching. So what about you guys?
I would agree. I think that one of the problems with this movie is the runtime. It's
oh yeah
2+ hours long,
full hours,
which is insane for a kids movie. I don't understand what they were thinking with this, where they needed to make it that long. I mean, holy crap. But I didn't hate this movie. This was a first time watch for me as well for this. I never saw this before, and I enjoyed it, but it is a bit bland.
It feels like it's not 2 full hours because they've overpacked the plot. It's 2 full hours, and maybe about a third of every scene actually has something to do with developing the story.
Yeah, there's so much nothing in this movie.
I just remember, just a few and far between, like him being in the clubhouse or like in the stadium doing, those little montage things they do, but nothing. I can't even remember what the ending was like. That's how bad it is.
Well, they lose, which is, I thought, was an interesting thing where I don't believe they win, and then he steps down as the manager, and the guy, he, like, early on in the movie, like after he takes over as the manager, he fires one of the players, and it sort of sets him down this like dark path for a little bit where he is really hostile towards everyone, and he's just like angry and mean all the time. And then all of a sudden he plays like this game of stickball with these random kids, and that just brings him back. And he remembers that it's all about the fun. And I think that that's like a big theme with all of these movies where they're like, oh, I forgot. This is a game. This is supposed to be fun. It's just a reoccurring thing. Like, remember, it's supposed to be fun.
That might have been his downfall because it maybe just a little too serious or too, not dramatic, but, didn't have all those enough fun aspects, dealt with a little more reality than most of these movies that we're talking about.
Yeah, perhaps.
Yeah, it does feel like a very active effort to try and investigate the psyche of a character that is deliberately written to not have much of one. So what are they doing? I don't know. We're somewhere, but we're not anywhere you can recognize in terms of storytelling or character development.
Exactly. Yeah. So maybe they're ahead of their time when it came to this one. So that's a Little Big League. The next one was The Big Green.
The story of the worst soccer team
We don't play soccer.
to ever hit the field.
Oh, you're showing such potential. Is that the team we're playing?
They got little kids and girls on the team.
Their goalie is starting to see things.
I'm not feeling so good about this.
That's his bird. Chase him down.
Their captain wants to quit.
Could we get out of here? This is embarrassing.
And even their newest player
I'm your man.
is shooting blanks.
Came out September 29th, 1995. This was another Disney underdog sports team of misfit kids for soccer this time, learning to play a new sport and becoming the championships while building self-esteem and having these dramatic family crises. And, they had a foreign exchange teacher and a former local sports hero that coaches. They threw everything, the kitchen sink, into this one. This one we had Steve Guttenberg, the Goot. He was Sheriff Tom Palmer. We remember him as Mahoney from Police Academy, Cocoon, Short Circuit, those awesome movies. Patrick Renna, who I think is literally just in The Sandlot and this movie. Chauncey Leopardi, again, I think only in this movie and Squints in Sandlot. Then the budget, we had $12 million. Box office, 17. A little more than I would have expected. The film has a 0% on Rotten Tomatoes. Another movie that to me I saw once or twice and it was so bland and boring, and I didn't want to watch it ever again. The most attractive part of it was the big VHS cover, with Patrick Renna taking the ball literally to his balls. Like, shouldn't that be hitting him in the stomach or something? Like, why has he got to catch it in between his legs? I always thought that was a weird poster. But Steve Guttenberg was no longer a Hollywood star. Police Academy had been over for years at this point, and I think he was in like 3 Men and a Baby, something like that. And so his star power just wasn't quite there. So the Big Green and Little Big League both flew kind of under the radar for me. But I would say the one that I would pick out of the two, just kind of based on our earlier conversations about extending the franchise a certain way, I had to go Little Big League.
I agree. I would go Little Big League on this one as well. I hated the Big Green. I saw this in the theater when I was younger, and I couldn't stand it when I was a kid. I think the big thing was that I was expecting, because you had two cast members from The Sandlot in this. So I was kind of expecting, it's like The Sandlot, but with soccer. I like that idea. And then you see it, and it's just this slapsticky, goofy Disney live action movie back when a lot of the Disney live action movies started getting really bad, and there's just nothing fun about this. Steve Guttenberg has this like really bad Texan accent throughout the whole thing, and it's just so painful to listen to. They overuse this like fast forward thing, like during a chase scene. They do it in the Mighty Ducks too, actually, where like they have a chase scene and everybody will be in fast forward all the time, but they do it multiple times in the Big Green, and just a lot of the jokes don't land. Everything about this movie is just so poorly made, and like they don't even know what soccer is. They're so confused about the sport as if it's a new thing.
Yeah, it's a rural town, but they're not on an island or anything like that. Like they have heard of it or seen it before. They may just not have it. Yeah, I totally agree.
One of the best parts about this is, so you have this foreign exchange student or teacher coming in from England, and she teaches them what soccer is, and the reason is because they're like the bad kids. They're like the bad class that doesn't do good in school. So she takes them out to like the yard and shows them how to kick a soccer ball, I guess, and then she's like, oh, guess what? You have a game tomorrow. You're all on a soccer team now. And there's so many logistical problems with that. Like, did she know beforehand? Like, did she know the day before that she went in that she was going to have her kids be on a soccer team? What if they didn't want to do it? Just so many questions about the Big Green.
Yeah.
So she was like the Dangerous Minds before Dangerous Minds. She's like, I'm going to mold these kids through extracurricular activities.
The other one that I wasn't able to see in time, but it sounds insufferable.
To me, this is the worst one on this whole list.
I agree, because like I said, I've only seen it once all the way through, and then I've seen the cover of the VHS or poster millions of times, but only watched it once, and I don't care to do it again. All right, so we have Little Big League then as our winner on that one.
Great. Now the pressure's off. Let's go win a ball game.
So we're moving on. So far we have Rookie of the Year, Space Jam, and Little Big League as our winners. And now we're down to our last match for the first round. We got The Sandlot versus Mighty Ducks. So Sandlot.
Watch it, jerk. Shut up, idiot. Moron. Scab eater. Butt sniffer. Pus licker. Fart smeller. You eat dog crap for breakfast, geek. You mix your weeds with your mama's toe jam. Yeah! You bob for apples in the toilet, and you like it. You play ball like a girl.
April 7th, 1993, we have Scotty Smalls moving to a new neighborhood, sees some kids playing at a schoolyard, tries to play with them, figures out he's terrible at baseball, but they are reluctantly letting him in, and he has one of the greatest summers of all time. This has Dennis Leary, who plays Bill, Karen Allen, who is just Mom, there's no name for her officially, James Earl Jones as Mr. Myrtle, Patrick Renna as Ham, Tom, I think it's Geary as Smalls, and then we had Mike Vitar as Benny the Jet. So some familiar faces. The budget, $7 million. Box office, $33.8 million. Rotten Tomatoes has a 60%, so one of our higher rated movies. And then, for me, one of the more defining movies of our generation, constantly referenced in pop culture, just celebrated their 25th anniversary this last year with a stadium tour around the U.S. So got to see professional baseball players geek out of seeing, Smalls or Ham, walking up to them. And still using "You're Killing Me" Smalls to this day as well. You play ball like a girl. The Great Bambino, or the Colossus of Clout. The Colossus of Clout. It's just endless quotes that you can use from this movie. And of course, one of the best ensembles of 90s kid actors, that would become familiar faces in other 90s kids movies. And they have a new series coming out with the original cast that's in the works for the Disney Plus program that's coming out in 2021.
Yeah, this movie is an absolute classic. Stand By Me is one of my all-time favorite movies, and I feel like this is the closest thing we have to a kid's version of Stand By Me. I think that it holds the test of time. You can watch it now and it feels as fresh as when it came out. And like you said, there's this great ensemble. Most of these kids ended up in all of the other movies that we mentioned today and more. The overlap on this list, these kids sports movies, is insane. There's just connections everywhere, and I think Sandlot is just truly is a classic.
I definitely agree. It absolutely is still extraordinarily popular now, and it has definitely stood the test of time in terms of just being one of those defining kid sports movies. I feel like it might even be the template for a lot of the kid sports movies that came after it, and it does kind of just cross over and touch on a lot of the, when you think of a coming of age film in general, just kind of feels very much like what you think of a quintessentially American coming of age movie.
Yeah, because it has that Americana feel because it's set in I think it was the 60s or something like that. So it's an era that a lot of people can relate to. Is a lot of innocent time, for kids at that point in time. Wars and things are going on, but for kids, it's a super innocent time. And then, like you guys said, just they touched on so many different aspects. It's not like a over the top goofy type movie. It does have it is comedic. It has a lot of jokes in it, but it's not like The Big Green, or like we talked about, these movies that really reach for these jokes like The Little Giants sometimes did. Whereas the comedy came naturally. The kids, the ensemble, they worked well together because behind the scenes they were, like with most kids, they became really good friends. So it just kind of translated to the screen, and so it just worked out well. So the ensemble part, the story itself, and Adam, like you said, kind of reminds you of a sports version of Stand By Me. Just kind of takes on some of those serious aspects of life, but also keeping it fun and light as well. So yeah, I agree. Sandlot is definitely up there in regards to one of the more defining movies. But the next one is also one of those movies, The Mighty Ducks.
From Walt Disney Pictures, he's a hotshot attorney who's never lost.
Yes!
Forced to coach a hockey team that's never won.
Keep swinging, maybe I'll give him a cold.
He'll try to teach them how to win.
You think losing is funny? Well, not at first, but once you get the hang of it.
And they'll teach him.
Get off the roof, you little monkey!
That winning isn't everything.
Let's have fun out there.
Walt Disney Pictures presents Emilio Estevez.
Are we ducks or what?
The Mighty Ducks. Rated PG. Parental guidance suggested.
October 2nd, 1992, we had Gordon Bombay, hotshot lawyer, after being charged with drunk driving, is ordered to coach the Pee Wee hockey team, the worst in the league. So, of course, they get better through a short version of montages to become champions, to beat Gordon's old team, the Hawks, to face old ghosts from his old coach. So we got Emilio Estevez, and I have to always do the Night at the Roxbury, and I was like, Emilio, every time I say Emilio Estevez's name. Gordon Bombay. We had Joshua Jackson playing Charlie Conway. Aaron Schwartz, who was Dave Karp. He was another overlap from heavyweights. And then we had Sean Weiss, Goldberg, who was in heavyweights and Freaks and Geeks. And then Marguerite Moreau, who's Connie. She was in Wet Hot American Summer. I added her in there because she's super hot as well. The budget was $10 million. The box office, $50 million. So definitely enough that, this is where we end up getting our franchise for the Mighty Ducks. The original has a 23% Rotten Tomatoes score based on 30 reviews. According to one of the reviews, the Mighty Ducks has a feel-good goals, but only scores a penalty shot for predictability. So my argument would be, this is the hockey version of the Bad News Bears, but pretty much all the movies we talked about are the Bad News Bears of that sport. They had all kinds of merchandise, toys, the spin-off TV show. We had the professional team, the Anaheim Ducks. They had the D2 logo, which is my favorite logo. And then, of course, the Mighty Ducks made $54 million in home video rentals in 1992. So, they knew that, people were loving this stuff. And it's another show that we're getting a new Mighty Ducks show that's in development with ABC Signature Studios. So another one that's still very relevant. We still have the Anaheim Ducks. We have professional players who still wear the Charlie Conway original green Ducks jersey all over the place. So another cultural relevant one. So for me, this is a tough toss-up between the Mighty Ducks and Sandlot.
Yeah. At the end, I'm going to go with the Sandlot, but the Mighty Ducks is certainly a classic kids sports movie. I mean, I think it probably would sit right underneath the Sandlot for me. Personally, I liked D2 more than the first one, but it still holds up to this day. I think that it shows its age a little bit more than the Sandlot, probably because the Sandlot is a period piece, but it's still a really fun watch.
Yeah, I'm between the two. I'm going to go with the Sandlot as well, but that's nothing against the Mighty Ducks. I've never had any particular great reaction to it, but it's a perfectly fine movie.
No, my choice was going to be the Mighty Ducks, but like you guys talked about, you got up some great points about, the mashups of the ensembles, the story, the relatability to Stand By Me. So, and we already have a sequel, and they're going to be doing TV series. So we have a lot more opportunity, I would say, that hasn't been already done like they did with the Mighty Ducks. That's been the last 20 years. Now it's the Sandlot's turn maybe to get that extended franchise.
Yeah, they did.
So
they did make a sequel to the Sandlot, but it was very, very bad.
Yes, that was mid 2000s or something like that.
Yeah, it was in 2005 or something like that.
Yeah. No thanks. I think the entire cast has written that off, and they're going with whatever the new development is going to be that they're all working on. So hopefully we'll see that before too long. All right, so we've had our first round winners. We have the Rookie of the Year versus Space Jam, Little Big League versus the Sandlot. So now we're going to jump into round two a little bit quicker. Now that we have all our points and all of our arguments, now we can make these decisions fairly quickly. So now we have Rookie of the Year versus Space Jam. So we talked about, Rookie of the Year is the relevance in regards to the quotes, baseball at the time being very popular, but now not not as popular. You know, it's on a little bit of a decline in regards to attendance and just fans in general, young fans, I guess. But the movie itself still very relevant. But Space Jam's got that sequel coming out. We got Ken checking the website to make sure it's still going. LeBron James, you can't get more culturally relevant than LeBron James. So for me, I'm leaning towards Space Jam on this one. But let's hear, Adam, I know how you feel about Space Jam, so let's hear your argument.
I don't know. I'm so torn with this. Like, for me, like, personal preference, it would be Rookie of the Year without a doubt, just because I don't like Space Jam. I think Rookie of the Year is the better movie, but certainly if we're looking at this as cultural relevance, popularity, lasting power, I think that Space Jam has all of those things over Rookie of the Year. So in that regard, if that's how we're judging this, I would say Space Jam. And it's with such a heavy heart that I say that, because
I felt that in your words. I felt the disappointment in your decision there.
Yeah. Ken?
Yeah, I think once again, for me as well, I have two very different answers depending on what criteria we're using. I think this time, maybe my judgments have been a little bit more towards personal preference at some level. So I will just submit a essentially symbolic vote for Rookie of the Year, just because I feel like Space Jam is already such like a pop cultural force that it may rise, but it was not completely unopposed.
Okay, no, I get it, and we can keep the personal opinions in with it as well. It doesn't have to be completely based off the main criteria. That was one I want to just kind of lead toward. You know, once we get to our winner, which one do we think, you know, would this one be able to have its, you know, withstand the time of a cinematic universe or spin-offs and all that good stuff. But Rookie of the Year is still pretty prime for it. We could always put him into a different sport. You know, maybe get a break his leg and now he can punt a football 300 yards or something like that.
There you go.
There's definitely ripe for that. But I do agree though that like with Space Jam, even though it's not the better movie, it has more. It's more ripe for more content, I guess, in regards to expanding it. So we all in agreement that Rookie of the Year is the better movie, but for the cultural relevance and cinematic universe, we think Space Jam is the one to go with. So with Adam's reluctance, we're moving on forward with Space Jam.
Put your hands in the air if you feel fine. We're gonna take it into overtime. Welcome to the Space Jam. Here's your chance to go dance at the Space Jam.
Please note that.
Yes,
that will be noted.
Now we're moving on to our second one, is Little Big League versus The Sandlot. So we talked about with Little Big League, wish it had a little bit more to do throughout a 2-hour runtime, but it has got a great foundation though, with taking this franchise and doing it with other sports or different aspects that Ken brought up. So that's my big takeaway for that one. Even though it's coming in with a low bar, that sets it pretty high. Of course, we talked about The Sandlot, a great classic, a generational defining movie. One that's going to be, you know, rewatched in our lives throughout for a long time. But how far can we go with it? It's already, like we talked about, it got a sequel, it's got a TV show coming out. What else could we do with The Sandlot?
I think more than anything, I like what The Sandlot represents. We talked a lot on the show about how the kids' sports movie is no longer really a thing. And I feel like what we need to revitalize that genre is another Sandlot, a movie that's like The Sandlot, that comes out and has that instant classic lasting power and is structured in a similar timeless way. So for me, I'm going on The Sandlot, and it's going to be like, because I like what The Sandlot symbolizes and I like what it represents.
Yeah, I'm also going to have to vote for The Sandlot for essentially the same reasons.
Alrighty. I agree with what you're saying. I see where you're going. My thoughts was just with Little Big League. I was like, I could think of the other sports that we talked about, but I also love the Sandlot for what it is and what it represents and what you guys just talked about. So I will agree as well. We were going with the Sandlot as our winner for that round here.
This magic moment.
Little pervert! Oh man, he's a deep shit.
All right, so now we're down to our final match. We've got Space Jam versus the Sandlot. So we talked about cultural relevance. Both movies, Space Jam's got the sequel. Sandlot's got the 25th anniversary. I say baseball, is not as popular, but the movie is just as popular, if not more, than what it was back then. Space Jam wasn't that great of a movie, but it has so much going with it, with the Looney Tunes and the NBA players and the Monstars. It's a tough one. This is a tough one.
It's not a tough one for me. I'm going Sandlot all the way.
You're killing me, Smalls.
I'm going Sandlot all the way. And I'll tell you why. I mean, it's largely due to what I said in the previous matchup with Little Big League, where I think if this genre wants a renaissance, we need something as strong as the Sandlot. And when you're looking at, could this go into, like, could it spawn a franchise? Could it go into something? I think Space Jam is such a niche thing. Like, it's such a specific thing. It's, you take an NBA All-Star and you put them against Looney Tunes. I think that Space Jam 2, when it comes out, is probably going to be pretty much the exact same thing as Space Jam 1. I'm not saying that the movie's going to be bad or anything like that. I don't necessarily have a prediction or an opinion on that, but it's just going to be more of the same, I think. And with the Sandlot, I feel like you can come out with a timeless coming-of-age sports movie, put a different sport in there. You can have a different cast. It doesn't necessarily have to be the same cast, like grown up or anything like that, but you retain a lot of the themes and like the voice of the original one, and I think that could make something a lot more special than whatever they're going to do with Space Jam.
You have enlightened me. Now that looking at Space Jam, you're right. There's not much they can do with it other than just bringing in different NBA players and putting them up against somebody else. So
more Space Jams. They're just gonna have Space Jams for days.
Yeah. So I think, like you said, the Sandlot definitely represents more. There's more that can be done with it. We can translate it to other things. So I think I might go to the Sandlot as well. Ken, what do you think, Ken?
I'm also going to go with the Sandlot, and I think the thing here is that we want to make sure that we're talking about, as we said, like revitalizing the kids sports movie, and I feel like the Sandlot just so perfectly represents like the devices, like the tropes, like the style and structure of a kids sports movie, where Space Jam almost feels like its own genre of movie. Like it is in some level like a kids sports movie, but it's also like its own thing. Like, on the Wikipedia article for a movie, it'll say title is they'll give the year and then they'll give the genre. I feel like Space Jam could just as easily just be Space Jam is a 1996 American Space Jam film.
Just a Space Jam in parentheses, like genre, Space Jam.
Yeah. Like Space Jam, like both of these movies are just like have iconic status among an entire generation. But I feel like The Sandlot represents an entire like subgenre of movie, whereas Space Jam doesn't need this tournament. Space Jam is Space Jam.
We have our winner, The Sandlot.
That's how you do it, Mom!
Damn, you idiot. Now we can't play no more.
Great, you idiot! It was a heater! Stupid idiot! Going outside! Just like I like it!
Yes, you guys are right. The Sandlot is the quintessential kids sports movie. It's the template that we should follow from now on to spin off to expand, to build a cinematic universe. So we will have our Sandlot cinematic universe before long, because it is worthy in our eyes. We did it, guys. We made it to the end.
Woo!
Excellent.
Ooh, that was we had some really great points there. You guys I have to go watch some of these movies now with a little bit different perspective.
I don't know if that's necessary.
Yeah, I don't know. Do you want to give another
2 of them
11 hours of your life to Little Big League?
Yeah, 11 hour long Little Big League, or the Big Green
marathon. Yeah, no thanks.
The brain draining Big Green.
Maybe we'll just get on writing that cinematic universe for the studio. So yeah, the Sandlot is it's always held up to the test of time. So that is the winner of our movie tournament. So that was everything I wanted to get into, guys. Again, thanks for taking the time to determine the ultimate 90s kids sports movie. Let the listeners know where they can follow and subscribe to listen to your podcasts.
Absolutely. Thank you for having us. People can go to 90spodcast.com to check out all of our episodes. You can subscribe to us on all the different podcast platforms, iTunes, and all that fun stuff. And if you follow us on Twitter at 90spod, we try to put out some daily 90s tidbits every day as much as we can.
Yeah, I didn't want to step on it, Adam, there, but I just want to say absolutely thank you for having us. This was great to be here.
Yes, thanks to you guys, and hopefully I'll jump on one of your episodes before long. We can knock out a crazy 90s nostalgic theme, see if we can come up with a crazy obscure one. So we'll see. We'll get that going. But everyone else, thanks for tuning into this episode of the Be Kind and Rewind podcast. Tune in every Throwback Thursdays for new episodes, and find us on all podcast apps, including Spotify, iTunes, iHeart Radio, YouTube, and Infirmary Media Podcast Network. Also, follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Be Kind Rewind Pod for all of your nostalgic needs. So thanks, and be excellent to each other.
Infirmary Media.